Here we are for another block. This time I'm with Stacy Herbert. I'm very happy to be with you. I don't think she needs any presentation, but I want to quote your bio on Twitter because I really like it. I talked to Space Cats about Bitcoin on Kaiser Report. Is there something you want to add?
I love Space Cats, but people for some reason always send us photos of either their babies or their cats watching Kaiser Report. Like, there's a huge number of people that send us these images. Apparently, I think it's actually partly Max, like the screaming that he does. I think it attracts babies. And also the cats. Cats like screaming things. They're like, what is this crazy dude talking about? And of course, they run the internet, so most people are watching the show on the internet. So
Yeah.
they have to observe. Like the cats are the regulators, right, of the internet. That's true.
So you talk a lot about Bitcoin on Kaiser Report. What's your first memory about Bitcoin? And also, does your love increase over time or just the same?
I kind of came through it. So our show, we basically started during the financial crisis, and which is at the same time that Bitcoin was born. And we were reporting from Europe, so we were reporting a lot on the run on the banks in the UK. So we were looking at that, and then Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks. I didn't know about Bitcoin at that point. It was John Matonis who reached out to us. We were filming in Paris, and he sent us an email saying, I'm going to be in Paris, and I'm going to talk to you about Bitcoin. So I got the email, and Max had created Hollywood Stock Exchange, which had the Hollywood dollar, and I thought it was like that. I was like, oh, Max, this guy is coming in to talk about a thing called Bitcoin, and it's like the Hollywood dollar. So you see the first interview. That's all Max had as a setup. I didn't do any research on it, and Max is interviewing this guy expecting he's talking about the Hollywood dollar, and he's like, this is nothing like the Hollywood dollar. And you know, we were intrigued by it, but I really became intrigued by it, by the like this huge, you know, violent reaction almost. Like people in the comments on our YouTube were like, why are you talking about this thing called Bitcoin? It should be called shitcoin. And they were claiming that, you know, there's 21 million coins, it's $2 each. That guy is, you know, somebody's running off with like $50 million. And what a scam. So I might have gone on to another topic and back to gold and talking about central banks and Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. But instead I was like, why do people hate this so much? Did I miss something? And I had in the first episode. And then so I started to try to find information. Back then, there were no podcasts. There was like very hard to find any information. And then you had to speak like 4chan to understand like any of the talk in the forum boards. And I was like, what the hell is this stuff, right? And then we talked to some people like Amir Taki before he went off and fought ISIS. But you know, back then he used to be in Bitcoin.
But you talk about many topics. Nowadays you are talking, of course, about coronavirus. And how do you come up with the topics?
Actually, very interestingly, I first started working in Hollywood. So I had gone to UCLA and studied literature. And in Hollywood, it's a visual medium. And the most raw, perfect way to tell a story is to actually not use words. So if you could juxtapose two images that tell a story, that is like the most pristine way to tell a story. You know, I mean, you could open on a you know, sand being thrown into a grave site, and then cut to, you know, a woman, you know, obviously has lost her husband. Like, you don't have to show all the story. So that's like telling a story with just two images. So I like to tell stories with two headlines. I find two headlines, and it could be from today versus something from 12 years ago. You know, I'll keep on looking through like the progression of the story, and I'm trying to tell the audience, like, just look at these two headlines, and providing a context, like so much of the news, especially the financial news, is just like, markets are up today. It's up 20 points, 30 points, 30%. You know, that's all they care about, and it's like, ADHD running from headline to headline. Well, I try to like step back and provide a context so you understand within it doesn't. So it kind of like brings people in the headlines, the financial news, into their world. We tried to connect it to, it's because you are part of the financial system and the economic system. Every single person is. So a lot of the financial news leaves people out, like you're deplorable and you don't matter, but you matter so much. And so trying to bring it into the world of everybody. Universally, we try to find stories that are not just going to appeal to somebody in Italy or somebody in Bolivia or somebody in Hong Kong. It has to apply to everybody. It's a universal. We try to find universal themes.
Love it, love it. So next one is a sort of a meta question. People often refers to you and Max as a couple. And are you annoyed by that? Are you okay? Are you happy? And also, being a woman in this field, is it okay for you, or sometimes it's something that is bothering you?
I don't mind being referred to as a couple. We clearly are. Max was on television before he met me. He had presented a radio show in Los Angeles. He had done an NBC segment on Hollywood Stock Exchange. So he was a stand-up comedian. And so he loves being on stage and having people throw eggs at him and stuff like that. Most women, I think we're harder with like people trolling us and telling us horrible things. Like in the early days when I first was on, I was scared, so scared to be on camera. It was when we made our BBC World show, The Oracle, the head of the BBC made me do the show. And I was like shaking so bad. And of course, you look on the YouTube version and somebody's like, wow, Stacy's hot. And you're like, oh, okay. And then they're like, what, she's a hag. And you're like, oh my God, I feel so horrible. So, to try to ignore that stuff, it took a while, but now I'm kind of used to it. But I don't mind being a couple. It's like I think we complement each other because we do have a lot of overlap of experience. And how we first started is when I first met Max, he was telling me all those stories about being a banker, and I worked in Hollywood. I'm like, wait. Like, none of this makes sense. Like, it can't possibly be true because the good guy wins. The bad guy can't win. And you're telling me the bad guy wins all the time? And then I started reading the Financial Times every day with him right after he read it and marked it all up. And I was like, oh my God, they're saying this like right there in the newspaper. It's right there. And why doesn't anybody know this? And so we started making a podcast before they were called podcasts. There wasn't an RSS feed then. We had to keep all our files below 4 megabytes in order for people to be able to download it, because this was even before broadband. So, I was fascinated by the fact that like all this stuff is right there in front of my eyes and had been my entire life, and I just didn't see it because nobody was presenting it to me in a way that was accessible to me, that didn't reach out to me. So, you put together my experience with script writing and script development and working in Hollywood, and Max's natural propensity to be a troll and go online and scream at people, a Baptist preacher sort of person. And, it all came together.
Absolutely. I have to quote one of your tweets because it's amazing. I am Stacy, survivor of 4 BTC beer markets and 1 block size war. What are your favorite memories of these years as a Bitcoiner?
The very first Bitcoin conference we ever went to, which was the first one ever, which was in Prague in November 2011. And we had been talking about Bitcoin for a while. We had interviewed guests and stuff, but it was on like satellites and stuff like that. So I didn't know, I had never met anybody in Bitcoin space in real life. And I showed up in Prague, and it was all these like hackers and coding freaks. And I was, Max and I had come from like the gold space where you attended conferences and everybody was dressed nicely and spoke well and shook your hand. And this was like, a lot of guys who can't look you in the eye. And they were like, I was like, what is this space? And we've been talking about this now for like 8 months. And are we sure about this? And then, those early days to be there was so special. Now looking back on it, you didn't know at the time, of course, but I'm still amazed that it actually turned out to be real, because at the time you're like, this must be fiction. Max and I spent all our time together. It might be a hallucination that and it's not real. And the fact that it seems to be real, I guess, like there's a whole ecosystem and governments are talking about it. It feels like maybe we're not living in our own little bubble and maybe this is a real story.
So my next question is about Bitcoin and communication. You're a storyteller, a writer, a presenter, and we have our own jargon, self-referential in Bitcoin. Do you think this is a barrier for pre-coiner, or maybe we can imagine a future where everybody will say hodl or things like that?
I think it's so fascinating how fast all these things come up. There is kind of a resistance, especially in America and maybe the UK, to this sort of, it's almost like young guys on 4chan who come up with these memes, and the amazing creativity and innovation in their ideas and thinking. It's kind of like in America, a lot of language comes from African Americans. You know, they're in this unique group that they communicate in a way that then erupts into the cultural space here. So much of our language, woke, is a you know, African American word that comes from the African American community, black people here. So I don't think it's off-putting. I know it might seem, you know, what does that mean? Obviously to an outsider, because you had to have been there, right, to know where it came from. And you have to explain the backstory. Oh, HODL comes from a guy who was like, Bitcoin was crashing from, like 600 to 300, and I'm going to HODL, and he was drunk, you know. But I don't think it's I think, you know, this is, especially nowadays, like everybody's on Twitter, everybody's grows up with this sort of language. I mean, I still learn it all the time, and it's erupting from the horrible places that people want to deplatform.
What did little Stacy wanted to do as a kid, when you were a kid and as a grown-up?
When I was a little kid, like I was obsessed with Clint Eastwood and country western, like and westerns, old westerns. And then Starsky and Hutch. I actually wrote to Starsky and Hutch, and I asked them to come into my school for show and tell. In America, we have a thing called show and tell. Yeah. So I wrote to them, and I told my whole class that Starsky and Hutch were going to come in, and they never contacted me. So I kind of wanted to be a cowboy, I guess. Like I wanted to just like be riding a horse out in the middle of nowhere. And then there was a point when I wanted to be an oceanographer and live out at sea. Like I thought it would be cool to live on the ocean for like a couple of years. And then I took an oceanography class, like this special class for like 10, 11-year-olds. And it was really boring. Like you had to measure all this stuff. I was like, no way. I was like picturing like big waves and like, you know, being out in the storm and like following whales and sharks, but it was like measuring things. I was like, oh my God, I can't stand this. And I had to like spend 2 weeks in the summer going, oh my God. And that was like my hopes dashed at like 10 or 11. And I was like, I have to find something else to do. And that's when I found Clint Eastwood. I was like, yeah, I could do this. I want to be Dirty Harry, you know, all the stuff he did. I was like, yeah, I could do that.
I have to admit that I wasn't expecting that, but I wasn't expecting something epic for sure. So I had a lot of fun. Thank you very much. And you are the first woman in my interviews, so I'm very proud to have started with you. And thank you very much again.
Thank you for having me. This is fun.